Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Sibme Coach Replay Show. I'm your host, Corey Camp, and I am so excited to have our special guest, Viviana Hall, on the call today. Viviana and I connected because she works as a dual language consultant in bilingual schools across the US, Europe, Latin America. We were chatting about making some of our resources here at Sibme available in Spanish. We've been doing that slowly over the past year, and we got to talking about the importance of some of the strategies that teachers are using and ways that coaches can support teachers who are in our online and remote learning environments. And Viviana is just such a wealth of information. So I asked her to join us on the show. So I'm so excited to have you on the Coach Replay Show. Viviana, welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited too. I am so happy to be able to see that what we can do in bilingual education is actually going to reach your audience. And I am very, very, very excited about it. Thank you so much for having me over.
You're welcome. Well, it's my pleasure to have you on the show. So today we're going to be talking about what all teachers need to know about bilingual education, and really 3 key factors that you believe really establish critical aspects of this topic today, which are the theory behind bilingual education, instructional delivery strategies, and how coaches can support teachers. You know, I come from Texas, and it's part of that requirement as a teacher that you have that bilingual certification there in many of those school sites, because it's a big part of our population are English language learners. But I know not every teacher has been trained in bilingual education. So let's start there. Let's start with that theory behind bilingual education and why that's important for us to understand, whether we are teachers with this knowledge, or I believe you call them monolanguage teachers. We don't have another language that we speak well, but we've got students who are in our class and English is their second language. So tell us a little bit about this common underlying proficiency theory.
Of course. And see, the main thing about speaking about bilingual education to me, I'm also from the state of Texas, but I am an English language learner myself. So I have gone through the whole experience, and learning about how it all works makes so much sense. I do believe, and I am working on an article that is specifically about how monolingual teachers are champions for biliteracy. You don't have to be bilingual to be able to help students who are learning in a bilingual situation because they themselves are bilingual. And that's what we call it for short, the CUP theory. The common underlying proficiency becomes the CUP theory. For me, it was easy to remember because I'm from Colombia. So anything that has a cup reminds me of a cup of coffee. So I can go with that very easily. But it's an interesting theory because it is explained as an iceberg. And when we see it, it's just the tip of the iceberg, but what is under that tip of the iceberg explains how bilingual education works. And there are some terms that people are sometimes familiar with, sometimes they're not. And these terms are referred to as BICS, which is the basic interpersonal communication skills, and the CALP, which is the cognitive academic proficiency. And I was telling you a minute ago, we don't ever go and talk to a parent, this is the common underlying proficiency. So I created this little video that you may want to share that has just a little bit of a easier language to explain it and how it works. And it really does make perfect sense. As a second language learner myself, I can tell you that I never had to relearn how to read or relearn my math. Those things transfer, and this video can really show us why it does and how it works.
Yeah, I love how you put together this video here. It's pretty short, so we'll play it. You've got some great visuals within this as well, just to give anybody who may not have heard of the CUP theory, or it's been a while since you've thought about that, or you haven't been thinking about that much because you've been learning all these other tools and thinking differently about your delivery. So we'll kind of ground our conversation in this today. So let me play this here for our viewers.
Perfect.
Let's just try an easy way to remember why bilingual education really works. And in fact, some people call this common sense, but it is all based on research. So to think about the common underlying proficiency theory brings us to thinking about two icebergs. So what we see is the tip of the icebergs, where language one, or the native language, and language two, or the second language, the language we are learning. In most cases in the United States, the way the school districts are working with dual language programs right now, most of the programs, in fact, in 35 states, the dominant dual language program is Spanish for the native language and English for the second language. So this is what we see. We see two separate icebergs, one that really represents the language that is the native language of the student, the other one represents the second language. And it is referred to as BICS, which is the basic interpersonal communication skills. But if you think about it, there's other researchers that like to call it in a way that is easier to remember, and they call it the language that happens during recess. And that's definitely an easy way to remember it. So thinking about that, let's cover for a minute what can be seen at the surface, and let's see what's happening below the surface. And that is referred to by some of the researchers as cognitive academic language proficiency, which is where everything is connected. So what you know and what you learn in one language, it actually connects immediately to what you know and what you have learned or you are learning in the second language. And easy way to remember, we will never going to be able to talk to somebody and say, yes, of course, the cognitive academic language proficiency, but we might be able to talk to a parent and remember that is the language that happens during class. That's the difference between BICS and CALP, and is the basic of what we really understand and know about bilingual education. When you see the language that's the basic communication of the student, the recess language, you're really not seeing what should be seen, because what we are not seeing is what happens below the surface. And that's where everything comes together. So this is a great picture to remember that even though we are seeing two different things, they're actually all connected through the cognitive abilities, the cognitive skills. There's a little bit of BICS and a little bit of CALP on everything that we do in the first language that mirrors what we're going to be able to do in the second language. So another thing that I like to always add to this idea of the two icebergs and the area of common proficiency is that the more the student has to offer in the first language. So when the student has a lot of knowledge, a lot of information, a lot of vocabulary in the first language, when the student is dominant in the native language, you can almost bet that even though the second language doesn't seem to be at the same level, there's a lot that the student is going to be able to transfer to that second language to make a balance between the first and the second language. So that's the reason why what we can do with students in terms of language proficiency sometimes really depends on how much native language development the student has had. So the message here is, what are we doing to try to increase what the students can transfer to the second language by promoting more and more growth in the students' first language? We'll see you next time with another tip about learning why bilingual education really works.
I love those visuals that you provided in that short clip. I think it really is helpful, and really for me as a teacher, it's very just like when I'm thinking about learning of all of my learners, if there isn't any prior background knowledge that I can activate and help them connect new learning to, it can be harder for them to acquire new knowledge, right? So it's a big part of what we do in all of our instruction. So Let's talk a little bit about what are some of those key delivery strategies that continue to work whenever we are online or remote or blended with our English language learners that we can remind educators of today?
Well, I love the way you made that comparison to prior knowledge, because that's exactly the way we should be thinking about it. And that's why any teacher that has been working already and continues to work with things like finding the zone of proximal development, any teacher who has become very familiar with working that type of approach and following that with scaffolding, and then making gradual release of responsibility part of the lessons all the time, those are going to be our teachers who are already doing what is best in remote learning and what is best for English language learners. And if you've heard a lot these days, we talk about the instruction that is the universal instructional design and the things that need to be in place in order for us to be able to conquer this new world that we're in, and the things that are challenging what we do. And basically, the one phrase that I will not forget about learning about universal design is that it says that if you design your lessons for the students in the margins, that's your English language learners, your special education students, your students who are struggling, if your lessons are designed for them in mind, then all other students are covered. And that's exactly the way this all is going to come together. In fact, right now, we're going through the midst of learning a lot about the science of reading, right? And everybody's learning about the science of reading and catching up with the science of reading and doing all of this. I have like a pile of books already, and I'm reading about it. And when I looked at some of those books, there's one specifically that has like 30 or 40 factors that are important to remember. And I wanted to take that book and turn it upside down so that it would be applicable to what we do in English language learning, because the first thing is not the content that you're delivering. If your lesson begins with the content that you're delivering, you're going to miss out on an opportunity that needs to be in place for working with English language learners, which is the student comes first. If you first think about the student, if you first focus on the student, and the only piece really that you have to add to what you normally would do in learning about your student and making that connection with your student is, now that we know this about language proficiencies, right? And how there's a language 1 and language 2, and there's 2 ways of approaching how do you see one and how do you see the other. So the first thing that you do, you learn a lot about your student. I have seen so many teachers doing such an incredible job with this distant learning, where you have 5 minutes with each student, where you get to know them one at a time. And when you get to your English language learners, you analyze their language proficiency, and you begin to wonder, how much do they have in their native language? Where is that proficiency level in their second language? And the more I know about my student, the more I can apply all these strategies that work well in the classroom. If I know how to find the zone of proximal development, and on top of that, I am adding how to develop more proficiency in the student that I'm working with, then I'm covering both worlds, the content and the language. So I feel that it's going to be a very, very positive opportunity to get to know students better if we know how to use this incredibly challenging and difficult time to take advantage to get to know our students and to see where they are and to find what they're doing. And in our case with language learners, the more they know in their native language, we saw it in the 2 little piles in our video, the more they know in their first language, the more they're going to be able to transfer to their second language. So why not allow them to do certain homework, certain assignments, certain things? They're at home, and that's their heritage language. So the more reading they do in their native language, the more things that we can accept that they bring to the table and offer as contribution to our class and our lessons in their native language, the more we're going to contribute to that transferring that we're going to talk about in just a few minutes.
I love that. Well, first of all, just again, that reminder of, it starts with our rapport, our relationship with our students. We need to get to know our students and understand them, so then we can better differentiate. I also love that you reminded everyone about universal design for learning. And one of my favorite TED Talks, and it's a slower moving TED Talk, but it's really powerful, is The Myth of Average by Todd Rose. And he kind of talks about there is no middle of the road. Average actually doesn't exist. There's a spectrum. And if you choose to not focus on the outliers and only focus on the middle folk, you're actually missing almost everybody, because there's not many people who lie in the middle across all of the skills and areas for in your instruction. And so that is a really great reminder. And I think it is powerful to when I was working with my English language learners, I always gave an opportunity for them to explain it in their native language and then start to utilize the English language to support their knowledge. I think that is a great, especially because we're at home, explain it to a family member in your language, and then try to or respond to the response with the class. So that's a great reminder.
Yeah, in fact, the best way to include everybody in the lesson is to think about the home environment these days, and how we can actually take advantage of the home environment. And for our English language learners, sometimes issues that go beyond what we can think about are the issues that are keeping them from performing at the level where they should be, or from showing us how much they really know. So the fact that we can, why not have a project that they can do in their own language and have that count? The greatest thing about monolingual teachers working with bilingual students is that the minute a monolingual teacher validates the value of their language, it's almost like they feel they have permission now to use it, to explore it, to really make that an asset and a tool. And I have met through the years so many teachers that they remind the students all the time, being bilingual is something, and they say it, I wish I was bilingual. Being bilingual is so important. You have to continue to make that advantage, that benefit, something that will continue to go with you down the road. And research shows again and again, and especially in this day and time, in the 21st century, so many of our kids, we will love for all of them to graduate from school. We will love for all of them to go to college. And it is our goal to get them motivated to go down the pipeline of school. But sometimes it happens and they don't complete it. And there's so many other factors that impact whether or not they're going to be able to make that next step to the next level and continue. But what we do see is that if they, God forbid, and for whatever reason, became dropouts, school dropouts, if they're bilingual, they're still able to get jobs. They're still able to contribute to the community. They're still able to maintain a level, and eventually they do go back to school. So it is, and another thing that happens a lot, and that's probably the reason why being bilingual is something that is more of an economy issue today, is that there's lots of jobs for people who are bilingual. So that's another thing that we can constantly tell the students. And in my field, I've been always fighting to end the teacher shortage in bilingual education. So I never miss an opportunity to tell someone that I hear that's a young person and is using both native language and second language. I always tell them, wouldn't you want to be a teacher? Because they're always looking for bilingual teachers. I do that all the time. It's almost like a default for me to try to get them to understand that the value of the two languages is really something that is going to help them anytime throughout the school years and above and beyond. So that's why it is important to make that asset, make that tool valuable, known to the students. Sometimes they're ashamed or shy about it, or they don't even want to admit it. I have met a lot of students who want to say, I don't speak another language because they're ashamed of it. But if we have the environment, the culture, we create the culture to say, no, it is an asset, is valuable, and we want you to use it. And you can turn in this assignment in your native language. And I've seen teachers, I don't speak Spanish, but I can read this. They can find the cognates, they can find the connections, and said, it doesn't matter if my student turns that in, because I know I can take advantage of that, and it makes it valuable.
Yeah. And again, I think that, like you said, that being a bilingual individual really does give you some unique advantages. And I am that teacher who I was telling you before, I took many years of Spanish and used it quite a bit whenever I was in college. But haven't used it in a while. I'm pretty rusty. However, if I hear someone speaking Spanish or I see it written, I can get some basic comprehension out of it. So, but I do think that's important to remember. We are so closely tied to our ability to communicate as an individual. I mean, it's such an interpersonal thing. So I do think it's important to still value the native language of a student. So for coaches who are supporting teachers with individuals who are learning the English language, what are ways that they can support that, especially that transferring of those skills between L1 and L2?
Yeah, that's such an important piece because in nowadays, I have a teams of teachers that work with me that are now in the classrooms, and they really do feel like they have never been under so much stress in their entire lives. So coaching today has become, I always say, a profession that goes not just to coaching, but we are really the spiritual leaders. We are mothers. We have been trying to help our teachers and trying to give them guidance and hoping that they will be able to really go through the struggle and with victory and come out of this and be champions. And it's been hard. So the one thing that I do want to keep in the coach's mind as a goal for working with our teachers who have English learners and the way we call them today, emergent bilinguals in our classrooms, that one thing is that it is so important to not make the computer and the computer screen the only way to learn. We still have to have hands-on experiences. We still have to make sure that the students are able to put together a project that allows them to move sentence stems, that allow them to grab some markers and write things and create a poster and create something so that it can be shown on the screen, but you have been working with it with your hands and with your materials. It is something that the best way to help our teachers communicating to parents and communicating to students about how best to utilize the foundations in their native language to move to a second language. That transfer is definitely a hands-on, a practical transfer. A student who sees the two words in English and Spanish makes that connection without even a lesson. Oh my gosh, these two words, cometa, comet. Oh, it's almost the same word. All I have to do is change it the way it sounds. So those hands-on practical experiences is what help that transferring from one language to the next. And that's the reason we're going to have another show coming up, because I love to show what hands-on experience really do to help students that are language learners and to help teachers to make parents participants of what the students are working on and how language and content kind of grow together. You know, we don't really separate one or the other. And that's why in this day and time, if you're a bilingual teacher, you have to have your objective for the content and your objective for language, because they grow together and they are easier to connect when you make a plan to have something that is a target for today. We're going to be listening, we're going to be speaking, we're going to be writing, we're going to be reading, and that's our target with this science lesson. So it goes together, it goes hand in hand, and hands-on experiences will help that step become concrete, something that can be done. So that's why I'm hoping to be able to show the next time that I'm on your show is how those hands-on experiences can be incorporated. And I almost like to say, you know, that it's great that we can use the computers. Today, we're having a great show thanks to the technology and to the opportunity to talk virtually. And you are in Ohio and I'm in Texas, and the audience is probably all the way across the world. And that's amazing. That's incredible. We definitely need to take advantage of that. But we have to incorporate for our English language learners. And as Universal Design says, if you make those hands-on experiences, thinking about your students in the margins, but become available to every student, I'm sure that you are really differentiated instruction for everybody, not just your English language learners, not just your emerging bilinguals, but everybody can benefit from a lesson that incorporates what are they going to do with their hands, what are they going to complete in their project that it can be part of the lesson and is not just videos to watch and internet access to other information, but actually you do it. In fact, I always work with teachers that when they begin typing on their computers, the things I said, please do it with your hands. Please write it down, because when you write down your own anchor chart, it's a model for a student to see that they too can write and they too can make it look pretty. So it makes a full connection of learning and the potential that the students have to show what they can do.
Yeah, I think that's powerful. And we know that there's lots of research around, recall and memory and deepening those neurological pathways for how we learn. It sticks more when we do involve other senses, like the hands-on and simply writing it versus typing it. It definitely, what gets written down gets done. And I'm sure that works very well digitally as well. But there's just something about having that utensil and putting it on a piece of paper. And so, especially as we think about with our online learners, right now, a lot of teachers are looking at, how do I balance my day where me and my students aren't in Zoom fatigue, but I'm also keeping their minds actively learning. Screen time, it's not 6 hours. It's not what's recommended. At home learning, online learning is shorter than what we used to spend our physical time in the school building for. And part of that is because that time was spent passing between periods or subjects and bathroom breaks and recess and all of those pieces. And those are still, it's still important for students to take breaks from that online learning. So that, as coaches, I really see that we can make sure that as we're supporting our teachers, we are helping them with those connections that they could draw from, asking those questions about what they know about their emergent English language learners so that they can support that in their lesson design, and also making sure that we've really developed some good offline learning and instructional activities.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes, and it has some steps. There's a key to the madness, and is developing in a way in which you're incorporating the things that we mentioned at the beginning. How do I make sure that I am targeting the zone of proximal development? How do I make sure that this really scaffolds and makes it to where the student can internalize it easier? And how quickly do I begin to remove those levels of support so that eventually my learner is independent? So that all of that is part of how do you get your hands-on experiences involving all these things that are the things that really help with lesson development and with the learning process in any aspect, in not only in content and also in language. And for the students who are emerging bilinguals, always involve your 4 domains of language. They have to have something, even if it's just a little bit, but they have to have some reading, some listening, some speaking, and some writing in every lesson. That's the way that they will develop all these language skills.
Yeah, definitely. Well, it's been such a pleasure having you on, Viviana. We'll have you back not next week, but the week after on October 9th. And we'll be looking at a lesson happen. We'll see it kind of roll out in action. Some of the things we've talked about today, we'll dive a little bit deeper into that. I'm so excited for that show. Remember, you can download the takeaways. Viviana's given us some great links to some resources and some research around just this underlying theory and some of the strategies that work with our emergent bilingual learners. Is that what you said the new term is?
Bilinguals, yes, that's
Yes.
to them now because they are emergent and they will be bilingual.
Bilingual. Yes. I love that. Well, thanks again so much for joining us today, Viviana.
Thank you so much. I love your show and I'm looking forward to seeing you again, and not next week, but the week after that.
Absolutely. And friends, don't forget to like, subscribe, follow us. You can listen to us on podcasts now this year, but don't forget to tune in often. If you didn't get a chance to check out all of the mini videos that Stephanie Affinito, our guest last week, shared each day this week, check them out. They are golden when it comes to comprehension. And I bet now that we've talked with Viviana, you can find some ways to support your English language learners, your emergent bilinguals, with those same strategies from Stephanie. So thanks again. Tune in next week. We have an episode focused on science next week with one of my coaches, my favorite coaches, Kathy Renfrew. So join us next week. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you so much.